Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Before I jump into this review, I just want to apologise if my voice is a little bit harder to understand than usual. I lost an argument with some gluten and I've had an awful sinus infection for the whole week, so I apologise if I sound a bit stuffy and a bit croaky. Hopefully you can still understand me okay. I didn't want to delay this video any further than I already have to make sure that it still comes out on schedule. And specifically the video I'm talking about is this review of the SMSL SU-6 and SH-6 stack. Before I get into that review though, I just want to thank all of you for helping Passion for Sound reach 20,000 subscribers. It's a huge milestone. It's taken I think about 4 years to get here, and it's felt like a long journey at times and a really fast journey at other times. So I want to thank all of you for your comments, your views, and of course for subscribing. And as a way of kind of celebrating the milestone, I'm going to give away the SMSL SH-6 and SU-6 to a subscriber on the channel. This stack over here is about $600 worth of DAC and amp. It's fully balanced, it does DSD, it's got Bluetooth, everything you can think of in a great little package. So if you're interested in winning the SMSL 8 stack, and that's the S version, all you have to do is jump over to Passion for Sound on Instagram, that's at Passion for Sound AU. All you need to do is jump over to my Instagram account, I'll put the link here, follow the Instagram account because that's where I'll announce the winner, and drop a comment down below to let me know that you've followed me. Once you've done that, I'm going to be doing a random draw of the winner from the comments here on YouTube, so make sure you're right followed. But be sure that you have actually followed me on Instagram to make sure that you see the announcement. Good luck to everybody, and thanks again for all of your support getting to 20,000. The next milestone's 50. Let's see how quickly we can get there. For now though, let's get on with the review of the SMSL SH-6 and SU-6. And I want to start off by saying a huge thanks to Apos Audio for sending these out for review. As always, even though Apos Audio are an affiliate of the channel and I do receive some income from any sales made, as you'll see, that doesn't mean that I'm automatically going to say it's better than other products where maybe I don't get affiliates from. As part of that, I'm going to be comparing the 6 stack here with the 8 stack, but also with the Aune X1S GT. So I'm going to try and put this stack into context for its price and its performance by comparing it to the higher level 8 stack and also comparing it to the all-in-one X1S GT. Before we get to all the comparisons though, as always, let me introduce you to the devices themselves.
I know that feeling. I know that feeling.
The DAC in this stack, so that's the SU-6, is a pretty basic DAC in the sense that there's not a huge amount to talk about. It's not basic in terms of its features and performance, but there's not a lot going on. Inside here you've got an ES9038Q2M chip from ESS, and that's giving you the ability to have high sample rates like DSD, as well as a selection of 7 different filters you can play with. I'm not going to go into depth on the filters. Generally speaking, what the filters do is a combination, depending on the filter you choose, of altering the attack in the music, so how sharp the leading edges of sounds are, and or how large the soundstage sounds. I don't believe there's any such thing as a right or wrong filter, and I think it's great that you get given the choice, you can play around and find the ones you like most. So I'm not going to go into depth there. It's not a big enough change that I think it's worth devoting time to talking about what each one sounds like, but I do like the fact that you can have a listen and choose the one you like most. If we do a quick tour of the unit now, on the front of the device, things are very simple. You've got this nice clean white display that tells you which input you've selected, which filter you might be on if you're changing it via remote control, and then of course the sample rate it's playing back. Other than that, there's a little touch sensitive power button here, which obviously switches the device on and off and can be quick pressed when the device is on to cycle through the different inputs. It's a nice simple front panel and I really like the design. Flipping around to the back of the unit, things are still pretty simple. We've got a figure 8 style power input, so there's no wall wart for this, there's just a lead going straight in, and therefore the switch mode power supply is built into the device. Whether you like that or not, I'm going to leave that up to you to decide. I don't think it makes a huge difference. Having said that, it does allow for a proper main switch on the back. If that's important to you and you don't like devices sitting in standby, you can switch it off completely. Next to the power socket, we've got ourselves a Bluetooth antenna, and the SU-6 is a brilliant Bluetooth DAC in the sense that it handles aptX HD and also LDAC or LHDC. So if you are somebody that likes to send music via Bluetooth, the SU-6 has you covered for the best possible available codecs. If you're not into Bluetooth though, you can also use a USB-C connection, and then we've got optical and coaxial as you'd expect as usual, and then of course we've got a pair of RCA outs to take the signal out to your amplifier. I should mention, as is becoming normal for devices like this nowadays, both the optical and the coaxial can handle high sample rates, including DSD. It's not quite as high bandwidth as what you can get through the USB, but you've still got full functionality through coax and optical should you want it. And so with the DAC features out of the way, let's talk about the amplifier. As you can see, the SH-6 amplifier is tiny, but it's actually still quite powerful. This will put out 1.3 watts into a 32 ohm headphone, meaning that it's got plenty of power for any headphone you're likely to use it with. And to put that into perspective, this will drive a pair of Headphone Sasfaras to very comfortable listening levels at about 50% volume in high gain mode. Now, I'm not recommending that this is an amplifier that you should buy for the Sasfaras, and the synergy is pretty poor. The tonality of this amp doesn't really suit the Sasfaras in my opinion, but my point is it's going to drive any normal headphone you're likely to want to use it with. To give you a little bit more clarity on the different sorts of devices that the SH-6 will pair well with, let's talk about this switch in the middle of the front panel. Like most other amplifiers on the market now, the SH-6 has a gain setting. In this case, you've just got high and low, and specifically that's providing 0 dB of gain in low mode and 15.5 dB of gain in high mode. That means that high gain mode is quite high, and it's very helpful for high impedance headphones like your 300 ohm Sennheisers or ZMF headphones. And then low gain is better for your sensitive headphones, your normal sort of 32 ohm dynamic driver types, and also IEMs. Speaking of IEMs though, do be aware that you're not getting a huge volume range to work with from the SH-6. At least not when paired up with the SU-6 that doesn't let you pull back on the output level. If you're running the SH-6 and the SU-6 as a combo, what you're going to get is a volume range where if it starts at about 7 o'clock, you get out of channel imbalance, which is where the left and right channels don't necessarily sound quite the same volume. That ends at about 8 o'clock on the volume dial, and by 9 o'clock on a sensitive pair of IEMs, you're starting to push the limits of comfortable listening. So do keep in mind that you're not getting a huge range of volume for IEMs from this setup, but the quality that you get in terms of the lack of noise is fantastic. So you can absolutely use the SH-6 to drive everything from IEMs through to fairly inefficient headphones, so long as you're happy to have a slightly limited range available on your IEMs. Or if you happen to be pairing this amplifier with a different DAC that lets you reduce the output volume, then of course you can open up the range for IEMs even more. I should also mention that if you're new to this hobby and this is an amplifier that you're looking at as a starting point to get into the hobby, you might be thinking that talk of channel imbalance means there's something wrong, but it's very, very common. Almost every single amplifier with an analog volume control like this one is going to experience a little bit of channel imbalance down low. And in fact, I would say that the SH-6 is one of the better ones I've tried. It's not the best, but it's a really nice volume control that comes into balance very quickly and also has a really nice smooth turning motion so you can get really fine adjustments. So if you are looking at this as a first amplifier, I would say that from that point of view, it's an absolute winner. We'll talk about sound quality in a moment so you can work out if it's a good fit for you. Before we get there though, let me talk about a couple more things on the front panel. We've talked about the gain switch, we've talked about the really nice volume control, and I like the fact that SMSL have gone away from this kind of edgy, sharp feeling kind of control knob on the SH-8 series. I like the fact that this is a much smoother and nicer to interact with volume knob. Also on the front panel, we've got a 6.3mm output for your headphones. This is a single-ended only amplifier. And then you've also got a power switch, which is a 3-position switch. You've got off, of course, being a power switch, but then you've got preamp or headphone amp. What that means is that the SH-6 here can drive your headphones from the front, but then with an extra flick of the switch, it can go to driving your powered speakers or a different amplifier if you like, from the back of the device. That's a really handy feature at this sort of price point, particularly if you've got yourself a pair of studio monitors or maybe a tube amp where you want to be able to adjust the volume control here rather than the tube amp. it makes for a really versatile little system. Also on the back panel, we've again got the same figure 8 power supply and also the power switch. This time though, very importantly, SMSL have provided a ground connection. And I say very importantly because there is the chance of getting ground loops if you don't have an earth on your amplifier. And so essentially what this is doing for you is it's allowing your RCAs coming out of your DAC to connect into your amp and create a ground for the entire system, meaning the DAC and the amp, through the ground connection here. So you do need to use the supplied power cable that comes with the SH-6 because it's got a 3-prong connector and it's got the extra little fly lead that's going to connect to the ground screw here. I really like the fact that SMSL have done that. I think it's a very clever design. It keeps the unit small and compact by not having a full-sized IEC connector. That's those 3-prong ones like you'll see here. So instead of having that, which is a really chunky connector, instead they've gone with this nice little figure 8 and a ground screw. So bravo SMSL, it's a great design decision. Moving on from there, everything else is really simple. You've got RCA inputs and RCA outputs. Inputs of course coming from your DAC, and the outputs, as I said before, go into your speakers or a different headphone amp. So at this point, on paper, we've got a fantastic little stack with all of the features you can think of. I think the only thing really missing from it is a balanced connection, which some people are going to want. That's what the SMSL 8 stack is about. But other than balanced, this is doing everything you could want it to do. In case you missed it on screen before, we're talking about a $290 stack here. And that's getting you a fully featured DAC and a fully featured headphone amp, all for under $300. And the prices I just quoted then are the list prices. When I've looked around at sites like Appos, you'll generally find that this stack is selling closer to $260 than $290. And so at that price, on paper, it's incredibly good value. Before we get too excited about it though, let's talk about how it sounds. Because it doesn't matter how little it costs or how good it is on paper if it sounds like trash. The good news is that listening to this in isolation, and what I mean by that is I always start listening to a product without any comparisons, as if I'd bought this as my one and only product and plugged it in and listened to it. And in that setup, this is completely and utterly enjoyable. I couldn't really find anything that I'd complain about from the SMSL 6 stack. The sound is clean, it's enjoyable, there's a little hint of extra energy in the upper mids coming from the amplifier, but nothing extreme. It doesn't throw off the tonal balance. It's just enough that I'm aware of it because I'm very familiar with the headphones I was using. And in case you're wondering, I use all different headphones when I'm testing devices. I'll call out anything that's specifically a great or a poor pairing, but all of my testing is done with lots of different devices to make sure that I've covered the ground that most of you are likely to experience. Something else to talk about from the 6 stack is that it produces a really nice sense of soundstage. It's mostly left and right only, which is to be expected for a chip-based Delta Sigma DAC and then also an integrated chip-based amplifier. But what's nice is it doesn't produce that wall of sound. It's not pushing all of the sounds forward and pushing them all down your throat. There is a little tiny sense of depth to the sound in the sense that some instruments are more forward or not as forward depending on the mix. Everything is still pretty left and right, there's not much depth in the soundstage overall, but things don't feel like that wall of sound approach that some devices can create. Beyond that, it's really hard to say much about the 6 stack in isolation because it's just good. It's nice, it's clean, it's enjoyable, it's relatively articulate. It's probably not the last word in resolution, but nothing at this price point is. At the price, it's easily as good or better than I expected. But to put that further into context, let me now talk about some comparisons. One of the products I've been asked about quite a bit here on the channel is the Aune X1S GT. This is an all-in-one DAC and headphone amp, and it retails for about $320. So you're in roughly the same ballpark. Depending on the price you get the 6 stack for, it might be $60 more, it might be only $30 more. But at that price, I thought it was a good comparison point. Is it worth spending a bit more? Are you getting better sound? The track that I used for some of my note-taking on this particular test, having listened to lots of different tracks of course first, but the track I used for my notes is Note to Self by Badly Drawn Boy. Before I got into testing the full setup with the amplifiers and everything, My first test was to see how the individual DACs from each of these compared, and that helps me understand where the sound quality is coming from, whether the DAC stage is influencing it, or whether the amp stage is influencing it, or a bit of both. And what I can tell you is that when I ran both of these as a DAC only, so the SU-6 DAC and the DAC stage of the X1S, when I ran those into the Burson Soloist GT, driving the Headphone and Sesfara headphones, the differences between the DACs were almost indistinguishable. I would not want to try and pick them blind. I don't think it's possible. I think there is maybe the slightest difference between the two, but it's so subtle as to be irrelevant. And so what I'm about to talk about really comes down to the amplifier stages. As I listen to note to self on both of these devices, now we're talking about the 6 DAC on its own and the X1S GT on its own using its amp stage. What I heard was that the X1S GT has just a bit more bass presence to it. It's just slightly more impactful, but it's very, very subtle. Now I should clarify here, I was using the balanced output from the X1S GT. I'll cover off in my review of the X1S GT if there's any difference between the balanced and the single-ended. But for the sake of this test, I tried to give each of the products their maximum possible performance level. And so using the balanced output from the X1S GT, it did have just that tiny bit more impact in the bass. But it is worth noting that the SH-6 here is actually the more powerful amplifier. Even when running through the balanced output of the X1S GT, it's still not as powerful as the SH-6. Jumping back and forth between the two, I felt like textures and clarity in the upper mid-range is a bit cleaner from the SH-6, and the 6 stack here also provides a slightly wider sense of soundstage. Along with that comes the sensation that instruments and sounds are slightly better separated within that soundstage too. So by having more space between each individual sound, you can then get a better sense of where everything is placed and kind of pick it out more easily. So the SH-6 or the 6 stack overall has a slight edge in that regard. The X1S GT on the other hand brings vocals and everything for that matter a little bit closer, a little bit more intimate, and it does come at the cost of a little bit of detail and texture, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, because what I found was that as I tried different headphones across the X1S GT and the 6 stack, it really depended on which headphone as to which system I preferred. The X1S GT is a better match for slightly leaner sounding headphones. So with something like the ZMF Verités, which are very clean and snappy and fast, I actually preferred the slightly fuller sound of the X1S GT. That means I'd probably also lean that way for a headphone like the HD800S, probably something like the HD560S as well. Anything that's got that little bit of extra treble and brightness is more likely going to benefit from the X1S GT sound than it will from the 6 stack. On the flip side, if I was using the Meza Elites, then that's where the 6 stack was better because of that extra bit of upper mid-range energy. With something like the HD6XX, I could probably go either way, although I think I'd lean slightly towards the extra sense of clarity that comes from the 6 stack. But as you can see, it's more about headphone synergy at this stage as to whether or not one is better or worse than the other. I think both are good products, and it's going to come down to your tastes, your preferences for a stack versus one product, and possibly your budget as well. And so at this point, unless you're swayed by having an all-in-one with a 4.4mm balanced connection, or maybe having a bit of extra power coming from the SH-6, I'd say both of these are very comparable devices that have a slightly different sound. And that led me to my second comparison, which is with the 8 stack here on my desk. This is the next step up coming from the 6 stack, and as I said before, you're jumping from under $300 to just under $600, so about double the price. I was curious to see what you're getting in terms of sound quality, and obviously a big part of that is the 8 stack brings you balanced connections. Now balanced isn't inherently always better. An optimized single-ended circuit can be just as good as an optimized balanced circuit. And so on this occasion, I was curious to see if a pure single-ended design was actually as good as a slightly older balanced design. Firing these both up, listening to Some Days by Audioslave, what I heard was 2 stacks that are very, very similar in sound. I think the 8 stack running balanced provides just a tiny bit more clarity, a tiny bit more separation in the sound, but it's only a small step. That little bit of brightness I talked about in the upper mid-range of the 6 stack, that does remain a slight difference when comparing the two. And that, as I said before, could be for better or worse depending on your taste and your headphones. If you have a slightly warmer, richer sounding headphone, you may actually prefer the sound of the SH-6, which is not to say that the SH-8S is a thick and warm headphone amp. They're very, very similar, but I think the SH-8S is probably a touch more truly neutral, whereas I do think there's just a tiny bit of upper mid-range emphasis coming from the 6 stack. The final thing that I pulled out as I flipped back and forth was I think the sound from the 8 stack is just a little tiny bit more refined. Again, it's very subtle, and depending on the headphone you're listening with, either you're not going to notice it depending on the resolving qualities of the headphone, or you may actually find that it's not necessarily a beneficial thing if you've got a headphone where you want a bit more edge, you want a tiny bit more grain. We're talking a 2 or 3% difference here. It's very, very small. And so for me, by the end of all this review, where I found myself sitting was that, to me, these are largely interchangeable. And I mean that from a sound quality point of view. I would be deciding between these two based on just a couple of factors, and none of them relate to sound quality. The reasons I would choose one over the other would come down to price. If you want to save some budget, maybe to spend more on your headphones, then buy the 6 stack. If you specifically, though, want some of the features of the SU-6 DAC, that being things like the ability to add the sound color, which adds some very subtle tweaks to the frequency response of the sound. If you want balanced output specifically, maybe you want more power because the SH-6 offers 3 watts into 32 ohms. The SU-6 also has preamp control. So if those sorts of features matter and are important, that's probably a reason to go for the 8 stack. There's no doubt that the 8 stack to me is maybe 4 or 5% in total better than the 6 stack. But at the price you're paying, if you don't need the features, I don't think you would ever miss the difference between the two. And so my recommendation would be, if you don't need the 8 stack features, buy yourself the 6 stack, save the money, and put it towards some headphones. Or of course, you could enter the draw to win the 8 stack, and maybe you don't need to spend any money at all. As a reminder, if you want to enter the draw, make sure you follow me over on Instagram, and make sure you comment here that you've followed the Instagram account. For now though, let me sum up by saying that, like a number of other reviews that I've seen talk about this, I think the 6 stack is an absolute beast of a system. It's not going to set the world on fire by being better than $600, $700, $800 systems, but for the price you're paying, you're getting really solid, fantastic sound. And so it's an easy recommendation for me if you're looking to spend less than $300 and get yourself a beautiful entry-level DAC and headphone amp. This is absolutely a no-brainer. If you're in the US or Canada and thinking about buying one of these, I'll put a link down below through to Appos Audio where you can buy from them, say thanks to them for sending me the unit for review, and also you can support the channel in the process without costing yourself anything extra. As always, I thank you for any and all support. It goes a huge way to me continuing to make videos like this. If you're elsewhere in the world outside of North America, I'll have a look and see what other links I can provide, so check down below if you want to pick yourself up a 6 stack. In the meantime though, let me leave you to the music. Good luck again in the draw, happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.